In the spring of 1961, a registered nurse named Eleanor Vance signed the lease on a one-room apartment 4 blocks from Mercy General Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. She was 31 years old, unmarried, and earning $4,200 a year on a salary that the men in the hospital's accounting office assumed was pocket money for a woman with no family to support. She had a sister to help, a mother's medicine to pay for, and not $1 of anyone else's income behind her. By the time she retired in 1989, Eleanor owned that building outright, along with 2 others on the same street, and she had never once earned more than a senior staff nurse's wage. Her colleagues assumed she had inherited money. She had not. What she had was a set of habits she practiced so quietly that the women she trained beside for 30 years never knew she was doing them at all. That was the point. A single working woman in 1961 who looked like she had money attracted exactly the wrong kind of attention. A landlord who raised the rent, a brother-in-law who needed a loan, a salesman at the door with a payment plan. So the women who actually built something kept their methods to themselves, and when they retired or passed on, the methods went with them. We never learned what they knew because they were never supposed to tell us. Number 27 on this list was something almost every frugal nurse did, and almost none of them admitted, because admitting it meant admitting how little she trusted the men handling her money. Number 14 was so quietly powerful that a modern financial planner would charge you for the same advice today. And number 1, the rule Eleanor Vance built every other habit on top of, is the reason a woman on a nurse's salary owned 3 buildings free and clear. These 30 tricks were not about scarcity. They were about a woman deciding that her independence was not negotiable, and then building the arithmetic to defend it. If you want to understand how a single paycheck became a fortress, subscribe now and let us count down the 30 secret budgeting tricks nurses living alone in the 1960s never talked about. Number 30. The pay envelope split before she got home. A nurse in 1962 divided her pay the day she received it, not at the end of the month when it was already half gone. Rent in one envelope, food in another, the streetcar fare in a third, and a sealed envelope she was forbidden to open. By the time she walked through her own door, the money was already assigned, and assigned money is far harder to spend than money sitting loose in a purse. The envelope was not budgeting. It was the decision made once, so it never had to be made again. Number 29. The shift she took that no one wanted. Night shift, holidays, the weekend differential. A single nurse took the hours the married women avoided, because those hours paid a premium and cost her nothing but sleep she arranged around them. A woman in Cleveland worked Christmas and New Year's every year for a decade and banked the differential untouched. The unwanted shift was not a sacrifice. It was a raise the hospital handed to whoever was willing to be inconvenient. Number 28. The room rented, never the apartment. A young nurse did not take her own apartment the moment she could afford one. She rented a room in a boarding house or shared with 2 other nurses long after her salary would have covered solitude, because the years she lived cheaply were the years she built the cushion that made everything after it possible. A woman who paid $11 a week for a shared room while earning a full salary was not poor. She was loading a spring.
Number 27. The bank account in her own name only. A nurse kept an account no one else could see and no one else could sign on, and she rarely spoke of it. In an era when a single signature from a relative could drain a shared account, the private account in her name alone was the wall behind which everything else stood. She kept the passbook somewhere a visitor would never look. Almost every careful nurse did this, and almost none of them admitted it, because the admission revealed exactly how little she trusted the people closest to her to leave her money alone. Number 26. The uniform mended, never replaced. A nurse's uniform was a real expense, and the frugal ones kept theirs immaculate for years. White cotton bleached back to bright, collars turned, hems restitched, a careful patch under the apron where no patient would ever see it. A woman who could keep 3 uniforms in rotation for 6 years spent a fraction of what her colleagues spent buying new every season. The mended uniform was not vanity defeated. It was a clothing bill that simply never arrived. Number 25. The meal cooked for the week on one day off. A nurse working rotating shifts had no energy to cook after a 12-hour day, and the diner across from the hospital was always open and always waiting to take her money. So she cooked on her day off. A pot of soup, a pan of something baked, portions set aside in the icebox for the week ahead. A woman who cooked once, ate from her own kitchen 6 days running, and never opened her purse at the diner counter. The Sunday pot was not a chore. It was a week of restaurant bills paid in a single afternoon. Number 24. The Christmas Club that was really a bond fund. The bank offered a Christmas club, a small sum set aside each week toward holiday spending. The clever nurse joined it and then, when December came, spent almost nothing and rolled the club money into a savings bond instead. The bank thought she was saving for gifts. She was saving for 1975. The Christmas Club was not for Christmas. It was a discipline disguised as a holiday. Number 23. The walk that was never a bus fare. 4 blocks to the hospital, a mile to the market, a half hour to her sister's. A nurse on her feet all day still walked when she could, because the bus fare was small, and the small fares were exactly the ones that vanished without a trace. A woman who walked everywhere within reason saved a sum across a year that surprised even her when she finally counted it. The walk was not thrift theater. It was the recovery of money that otherwise leaked away 1 nickel at a time. Number 22. The doctor's discarded journals, read for free. A nurse who wanted to advance read everything, and she read it for free. The medical journals the doctors discarded, the textbooks left in the ward library, the in-service trainings the hospital paid for. She turned her workplace into a school that cost her nothing and used the knowledge to climb into the better-paid specialties. The free reading was not ambition for its own sake. It was a raise she studied her way into without ever paying tuition. Number 21. The gifts made, never bought. A single nurse had nieces, nephews, colleagues, and a long list of occasions, and she met every one of them with something made by hand. Knitted, baked, sewn, preserved. A jar of jam, a pair of mittens, a tin of fudge wrapped in waxed paper. The handmade gift was warmer than anything from a store and cost a fraction of it, and no one ever thought less of her for it. The made gift was not cheapness. It was generosity routed around the cash register.
Number 20. The lunch carried in every single day. The hospital cafeteria was convenient, and convenience is the most expensive thing a working woman buys. The frugal nurse carried her lunch in a tin every day for 30 years. A sandwich, an apple, a thermos of coffee from her own pot. A woman who never bought a cafeteria meal saved the price of 1 lunch a day, and 1 lunch a day across a career became a number large enough to put a down payment on a building. The carried tin was not deprivation.
It was a down payment, assembled one sandwich at a time. Number 19. The good shoes bought once. A nurse stood on her feet for 12 hours, and cheap shoes destroyed both the feet and the budget because they wore out fast and had to be replaced. So the wise nurse bought one excellent pair of nursing shoes, resold them when they wore, and kept them for years. The expensive shoes were cheaper than the cheap ones across the life of the feet wearing them. Buy once, buy well, and resole instead of replacing. Number 18. The savings taken out before the bills went in. This is the habit the planners now call paying yourself first, and the nurses were doing it half a century before it had a name. The savings came out of the envelope the day the pay arrived, before a single bill was considered, because money saved last is money never saved at all. A woman who treated her own savings as the first and most non-negotiable bill of the month built a cushion no emergency could fully drain. In 1960, a single woman in America who wanted to build security was working against the architecture of the entire system. She often could not get a mortgage in her own name. A bank could refuse her a loan or a credit card without a husband to co-sign. Her salary for the same work was a fraction of a man's, and the assumption underneath all of it was that she did not really need money, because surely a husband was coming who would handle that. The nurses who built something did it inside those walls, not by knocking them down. They could not change the rules, so they mastered the only thing the rules could not touch: what they did with every dollar that actually reached their own hands. That was the whole game. A woman who could not get a mortgage could still pay cash slowly. A woman whose salary was capped could still cap her spending lower. The system limited what came in. It had no power at all over what went out, and the careful nurse fought the entire war on that single front.
Number 17. The flat in a working building bought slowly. A nurse who wanted to own did not buy the pretty house in the nice part of town. She bought a small, sound, unglamorous building near the hospital, where the rents were reliable and the tenants were people like her. A woman who bought plain and bought near her work bought something that paid for itself while she slept. The plain building was not a come-down. It was an income that happened to have walls. Number 16. The single good coat. A working woman needed a winter coat, and fashion wanted her to need a new one every few years. The frugal nurse bought one coat of excellent wool in a color that never dated, and she wore it for 15 winters. A good coat, brushed and stored properly each spring, outlasted 3 cheap ones and looked better the whole time. The single coat was not a lack of style. It was style that had done the math. Number 15. The library card that replaced the bookstore. A nurse who read filled her evenings without spending a dollar, because the public library held more than she could finish in a lifetime. Novels, magazines, the records she borrowed to play at home. A woman who never bought a book she could borrow kept her entertainment budget at almost nothing across her entire life. The library card was not a poor woman's substitute. It was the same pleasure, with the price removed.
Number 14. The compound interest she let run untouched. The single most powerful thing a frugal nurse did was the one that looked like doing nothing at all. She put money into a savings bond or a sound account, and then she left it year after year, never touching it, letting the interest earn interest on itself. A modern financial planner would charge you a fee to explain this same principle. The nurse did it by instinct, watching a small sum become a serious one simply by refusing to interrupt it. The untouched account was not idleness. It was the only employee a single woman could hire who worked every hour of every day for free. Number 13. The car she did not own. A single nurse who lived near her work often owned no car at all, because a car was a purchase that kept on charging her every month for the privilege of having bought it. Gas, insurance, repairs, the slow loss of its value. A woman who walked, took the streetcar, and shared a ride when she truly needed one, avoided the largest recurring expense most working people simply accepted. The absent car was not hardship. It was a raise she gave herself by refusing a bill everyone else paid. Number 12. The sister network that replaced paid help. Single nurses formed quiet circles of mutual aid. One had a sewing machine, one knew how to cut hair, one could be trusted to mind a sick parent for an afternoon. They traded these things among themselves and never let cash touch the exchange. A woman inside such a circle had a seamstress, a barber, and a nurse on call, and paid for none of them. The circle was not charity. It was an economy of women that ran entirely without money. Number 11. The raise that went straight into savings. When a nurse finally got a raise, she did not raise her living to match it. She kept living exactly as she had the week before and routed the entire increase into savings, where her lifestyle could never find it. A woman who absorbed 3 raises this way across a decade was living on a junior salary while banking a senior one. The unspent raise was not denial. It was the refusal to let her costs chase her income up the ladder. Here is the thing the planners writing about this now tend to miss. None of these habits was difficult. Not one of them required a special talent or a secret the rest of the world lacked. What they required was that a woman do the same small, unglamorous thing over and over for 30 years without being congratulated for it, without anyone knowing, and without the structure of the time ever once making it easy. That is the part that is genuinely rare. The trick was never the trick. The trick was the repetition, sustained alone, in silence, by a woman who had decided that no one was coming to do it for her. Number 10. The medical knowledge that kept the doctor's bill away. A nurse was her own first physician, and the physicians of everyone close to her. She knew when a fever needed a doctor, and when it needed rest, when a cut needed stitches, and when it needed cleaning. A woman with that knowledge spent a fraction on medical care of what a frightened layperson spent, because she knew exactly which expenses were necessary and which were only fear. The knowledge was not a perk of the job. It was a doctor's bill she rarely had to pay. Number 9. The furniture bought second-hand and solid. A single nurse furnishing a room did not buy new, and she did not buy flimsy. She bought a solid oak dresser at an estate sale, a good chair from a house being cleared out, real wood that would outlive her. A woman who bought old quality instead of new cheapness furnished an entire life for the price of 1 room of new furniture, and her pieces only grew more valuable. The second-hand rule was not making do. It was buying the best at the price of the worst.
Number 8. The garden in window boxes and a borrowed plot. Even a nurse in a city apartment grew something. Herbs on the windowsill, tomatoes in a box on the fire escape, a row in a friend's backyard plot. It was not enough to live on, but it trimmed the grocery bill and gave her something the money economy could not. Food that owed nothing to anyone. The small garden was not a hobby. It was a quiet declaration that not everything she ate had to be bought. Number 7. The single splurge, chosen on purpose. The frugal nurse was not a miser, and she knew that a life of pure denial does not hold. So she chose one thing, deliberately, and spent on it without guilt. The theatre once a month,
a fine cup of coffee on Sundays, one good wool sweater a year. By choosing the splurge on purpose, she kept the 100 unchosen splurges from happening by accident. The deliberate indulgence was not a contradiction of thrift. It was the pressure valve that made a lifetime of thrift survivable. Number 6. The funeral and the future, both prepaid. A single woman with no husband and no children thought hard about who would handle things when she could not. So she arranged it herself, early. A burial plan paid for in advance, a will drawn up, papers in order. A woman who had settled these things was never vulnerable to being sold an expensive solution in a moment of fear. The prepayment was not morbidity. It was the refusal to let anyone profit from her at her weakest. Number 5. The skill kept current, so the job was never at risk. A nurse's security rested on her ability to work, and so she protected that ability above all. She kept her certifications current, learned the new procedures, stayed valuable enough that she was the last to be let go and the first to be asked back. A woman whose skills never went stale held the one form of insurance that paid out every single month, in the form of a paycheck no one could easily take from her. The current skill was not careerism. It was the foundation under every other number on this list. Number 4. The interest earned, never the interest paid. The frugal nurse lived on one side of the interest line and refused to cross it. She earned interest on her savings, and she paid interest on nothing, because she understood that $1 of interest paid and $1 of interest earned are the same dollar pulling in opposite directions. A woman who never carried a debt and never financed a purchase kept the bank working for her instead of against her for her entire life. The line was not pride. It was the simple mathematics of which direction the money flowed. Number 3. The appearance of having exactly enough. No careful nurse ever looked wealthy, and none ever looked desperate. She looked like a woman who had precisely enough, and not a penny more. And that appearance was deliberate. It kept the landlord from raising the rent, the relatives from asking, and the salesman from circling. A woman who looked like she had nothing to spare was rarely asked to spare anything. The plain front was not modesty. It was a fortress built out of looking ordinary, and it kept everything behind it safe. Number 2. The emergency fund that was never for emergencies she invented. The frugal nurse kept a sum set aside for true emergencies, and the entire discipline rested on her brutal honesty about what an emergency actually was. A broken tooth was an emergency. A sale was not. An illness was an emergency. A want dressed up as a need was not. A woman who guarded that line ferociously always had the money when the real thing came, because she had never once spent it on the false ones. The fund was not the trick. The honesty about what deserved it was the trick.
Number 1. Decide what enough is, and stop there. That is the whole rule, and every other habit on this list is only a way of serving it. Eleanor Vance decided early what a good life cost her, and it was less than she earned, and she did not move that line upward when her income rose or when her colleagues' lifestyles climbed past hers. She knew the number. She lived under it. And the gap between what she earned and the enough she had defined for herself became, dollar by quiet dollar, 3 buildings and a retirement that depended on no one. There was no secret beneath this one. There was a woman who had decided what enough was and possessed the rarest discipline of all, which is the ability to actually stop there. It is the least glamorous decision a person can make about money.
it has always been the one that decides everything. None of these 30 habits required a high salary, a husband's signature, or a kind bank. They required a woman to decide that her independence mattered more than appearing comfortable, and then to defend that decision in 1,000 small, silent ways for the length of an entire working life. Eleanor Vance signed that first lease in 1961 as a woman the system had decided did not really need money. She spent the next 28 years quietly proving the system wrong, and she never told a soul she was doing it, because telling would have invited exactly the people who would have stopped her. When she retired, the women she had trained beside were astonished. They had worked next to her for 30 years and never once suspected that the plainest, most ordinary nurse on the ward had built something none of them had dared to imagine a single woman could. The habits died with women like her, not because they were complicated, but because they were practiced in a silence that was the whole point. The pay envelopes are gone. The passbooks hidden where no visitor would look are gone. But the arithmetic did not die, and the decision is still available to anyone willing to make it the way Eleanor made it, in a one-room apartment 4 blocks from the hospital. Decide what enough is, live beneath it, and defend the gap quietly for as long as it takes. Before you go, tell me one thing in the comments. Was there a woman in your own life, a mother, a grandmother, an aunt, a single woman who never seemed to have much and yet always had exactly enough, who knew how to make $1 do the work of 3? What was her quiet rule? Leave it below. Somewhere in this comment section is the wisdom of a woman who was never asked and never told, and the only way the rest of us will ever hear it is if you write it down for her.